Good morning, everyone. And for anyone who's watching this morning's meeting, I'm about to call to order the final meeting of the Pandemic and Literacy Subcommittee of the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. With me is my colleague and fellow member, Professor Martin West, also present from the board, Secretary Patrick Tutwiler and Chair Catherine Craven. Welcome and thank you for joining us to all of you. We have a roster of speakers on a 2-item agenda, and I just want to frame it kind of broadly. But before I do, Ms. Betancourt, have we taken a roster of who's present? Am I ready to call the meeting to order?
Yep, you can have members introduce themselves if you'd like, but you've already named who's here. It's up to you, Chair.
Kind of did it for him, but why not? Marty, you want to introduce yourself?
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Marty West, a member of the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education from Newton, Massachusetts.
And Secretary?
Good morning, all. Secretary of Education, Pat Tutwiler. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair Craven?
Hello, I'm Catherine Craven, the Chairman of the Board of Ed from Brookline, and also thank you, Member Moriarty, Mr. Chairman, for this meeting, for bringing this work on. I had appointed this committee as a way of getting board members involved in the discussions on pandemic recovery a while back. So it's good to see that we're coming up with some conclusions to the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so I'm Michael Moriarty, and I'm a member from, speaking to you from Holyoke, and also have been chairing this subcommittee since it was formed, I believe, at the November 2022 meeting. We've had a succession of informational meetings with a roster of some very well-informed, significant leaders in this field. And our focal point has been assessing where we are at in terms of data and process as a department on several areas within early literacy practice that we articulated at our first meeting by Kimiona Burke of Excel in Ed, who was spoken nationally on this topic and has sort of created a framework that many states are using to approach policy in terms of structured early literacy. So today's meeting will be the last. We will have covered most all of the topics. And at some point, we simply need to coalesce the information that we have and bring it forward to the board and to the department. And hopefully this will be a useful framing for going forward as we continue to do the work. So today we're going to begin by focusing on the GLEAM grant, and with that, the underlying concepts of curriculum selection, the professional development, and coaching that we know from those frameworks need to be a part of it, and then finally taking a look at how districts can articulate plans to proceed most effectively. And we've got Assistant Superintendent from Pentucket, Brett Conway, to join us with that as someone who has done some noteworthy work in that very specific area. But with that, we have leadership from the department, including Interim Commissioner Russell Johnson. Commissioner Johnson, thank you for being here. And I'll let you speak to this a little bit. And then if you'd like to introduce Catherine Tarka and Allison Pickens, we'll get into the details. And Aaron Hashimoto Martel as well. So thank you, all of you, for being here to share this information. Commissioner.
Thanks, Mike, and really glad to have this opportunity to delve in more deeply around GLEAM. I think that seeing how comprehensive supports can be brought together through GLEAM using not only just the resources that GLEAM provides, but the combination of opportunities that we can create by having those funds and putting all the pieces together can lead to results. And we're really excited to share more about that with you today. So, Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I'm Catherine Tarka. I lead the Office of Literacy and Humanities. I'm really excited to see you all again, members of the committee, and Chair Craven. We've engaged for the last year plus around so many different aspects of early literacy, and today we get one more chance to present to you about DESE's work in this area and to highlight the GLEAM grant. Today's meeting is really, I see, a summary of all the work that the committee has done, like the chair mentioned. And so we want to frame the discussion around systemic improvement in early literacy. I am going to attempt to share my screen to talk about that. Let's see. Are the slides visible? Okay, great.
Yes, they are.
Thank you. Still look right? Okay, great. As the Chair Moriarty framed for us in his opening remarks, what we want to talk about today are the components of a successful literacy program in an elementary school or an early childhood center, and what it takes to put those elements in place. So I wanted to start by sharing a framework that we've been using to design a lot of our work here at DESE. The framework that you see here boils down many of the components that we see as important parts of an early literacy program that is effective for all students and, importantly, equitable for student experiences and student outcomes. So as you can see, on the two sides, we think that an early literacy approach that supports all students to succeed is first and foremost built on evidence-based practices and culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. And then the four components that are highlighted in the boxes, we believe that an effective early literacy program needs to provide high quality tier 1 instruction for all students, needs to offer explicit and asset-based language instruction for students who are learning English, needs to use database decision-making processes to provide tiered supports to any students who need them, and finally, needs to engage families as meaningful partners in children's literacy learning. So as I said, we believe that a school that has a literacy program featuring these components will support all students in the early grades to be successful in their literacy development. And I thought it would be helpful just to begin the discussion today, since we're talking about systemic improvement with this framework, because these are the components that we're working towards and that we're supporting schools and districts to put into place. And each of these components, as you can imagine, it doesn't look like a lot, it's only 6 boxes, but each of these components requires investments, not just of time and money, but really quite a lot of coordination and expertise to put into place. And there's a lot of research out there as to what it takes to achieve an effective literacy program in a school. We've been drawing upon a lot of emerging implementation science research to identify the resources and practices that will support an effective and equitable literacy program. And as you can see, there's a lot of resources and practices that are needed in a school to make this literacy program a reality. Just to name a few that I would highlight, a district-wide literacy leadership team, job-embedded coaching for teachers, professional learning and support for leaders, sufficient time for both instruction and professional collaboration. Each of these is a big rock to move and really important for the literacy program ultimately to be successful for all students. I mentioned implementation science. Really, the science of implementation and instructional improvement is a burgeoning field that's growing every day. So I'm not summarizing everything here about what it takes to put a literacy program in place that's effective, but I wanted to summarize some of the key levers or inputs that have to be part of systemic improvement. Because here at DESE, when we design support programs or grants like GLEAM that Allison is going to talk about, this type of framework helps us determine where we're going to invest, where we're going to target resources, because these are the areas that schools or districts often need support or request support to strengthen their program. And we have really seen that with intensive support, schools and districts can achieve transformation of their literacy programs. And when Allison talks about GLEAM, and she's led the GLEAM grant almost since its inception, You'll see that it's an intensive support grant, and by that I mean districts that receive the GLEAM grant receive a huge infusion, really, not just of funding, but guidance, resources, coaching, partnerships, all kinds of supports that are designed to help the school not just tweak their literacy program, but really transform it so that it can help all students achieve equitably and at high levels. And the GLEAM grant, which stands for Growing Literacy Equity Across Massachusetts, has been successful, and we'd like to share some of the evidence of success for both educators and students within that program, and also some details about the intensive level of support that we provided and the amazing work that the educators did to make those results possible. So I'm going to just stop sharing for a sec so I can turn it over to Allison. And Allison, you can feel free to jump in while I move over to your slides.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Allison Pickens. I'm an ELA literacy content specialist here at BESE, and for the past few years have been leading and coordinating the GLEAM grant. I really appreciate you having me today, and I'm really excited to share more about the GLEAM program, its impact, and why GLEAM has been successful in supporting improvements in early literacy experiences and outcomes for students. First, I will give a brief overview of the GLEAM program. Then I will share data that demonstrates our impact thus far, and finally end with an explanation as to why the GLEAM approach of intensive support works. So let's start with a brief overview of the program. As Catherine said, GLEAM is an acronym for Growing Literacy Equity Across Massachusetts, which is the Massachusetts program name for the federally funded Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant, which Massachusetts was awarded in FY20. This 5-year, $20 million grant seeks to improve literacy experiences and outcomes for all students, especially those who have been historically underserved, throughout and beyond the grant funding period, through funding and direct DESE and consultant support for districts to develop, strengthen, and maintain a strong multi-tiered system of support for ELA and literacy. GLEAM is a very intensive support program with relatively few districts spending over $20 million across 4 years for deep literacy improvement efforts with heavy DESE oversight and coordination. As you'll see later in this presentation, this intensive support approach is working, which is why we are so excited to share these updates with you today. The GLEAM grant provides funding and intensive support for a number of literacy improvement activities, including the evaluation, selection, purchase, and implementation of high-quality instructional materials. The grant also supports intensive leadership coaching, strategic visioning support, and data-driven progress monitoring through the partnerships of an expert literacy consultant. Districts are also supported in providing high-quality professional learning to all educators and stipends for educators to participate in professional learning and internalize high-quality instructional materials outside of their contracted hours. Additionally, districts across the GLEAM program participate in monthly networks with one another, during which they share problems of practice, learn from one another, and reflect on their progress thus far. With these supports, districts participate in a systems analysis that acts as the foundation for their creation of their equity-centered literacy action plan, and all districts participate in 4 annual walkthroughs, the data from which defines their cycles of inquiry and continuous improvement as they work towards their goals. With that brief overview, I'd like to now talk about the success and the impact GLEAM has had on students, educators, and districts since it began in 2021, and the evidence we have of our success. Since 2021, GLEAM Cohort 1 districts have seen a 235% increase in the use of HQIM, a 232% increase in time spent in coaching and/or PD related to literacy. GLEAM districts have also seen a 45% increase in preschool students on track for kindergarten and a 32% decrease in students at risk for reading failure in grades K through 5. Though these numbers are incredible and are numbers we are very proud of, we also wanted to highlight a specific district and hone in on what GLEAM success looks like at the classroom level. The chart you see here tracks one district's growth in 4 categories: culture of learning, focus on high quality texts, inclusion of grade level tasks and questions, and student ownership. The percentages you see here represent how many classrooms demonstrated a high level of these observation criterion. The walkthroughs were co-conducted by TNTP, DESE, and district leaders, and then TNTP's analytics team analyzed and synthesized the data. As you can see from this district case study, the growth has been incredible. I would like to highlight the growth in culture of learning and student ownership over the course of a year, especially. We are excited to get the next round of walkthrough data from TNTP for this current school year, and will continue to support districts in reaching 100% on all of these observation criterion, while ensuring that they are supported in sustaining this work beyond the grant funding period. With that information, I want to share why GLEAM has been so successful thus far. GLEAM's success rests on its intensive support. GLEAM is not just a curriculum program or a professional development program. It's a systems-level, strategic, and long-term support program intended to allow districts the time, space, and resources and coaching needed to improve literacy experiences and outcomes for all students. To specify, GLEAM's success begins with a comprehensive systems analysis. GLEAM funds a comprehensive literacy-agnostic systems analysis that not only identifies strengths and areas for growth in a district's structural approach to instructional improvement, but also jumpstarts relationships with districts and has provided a common language for problem solving and the foundation for a strong data-based literacy action plan. By identifying those areas of growth and highlighting the areas of greatness, GLEAM districts are able to create improvement plans that are supported throughout the district and are aligned with the strengths and needs of all stakeholders. All plans include robust database progress monitoring to ensure continued growth and success. In that vein, GLEAM's success also rests on intensive leadership coaching. Those supporting classroom teachers is a hallmark of the GLEAM program. True transformative change in literacy requires strong distributive leadership. These components you see on your screen today help to support the evidence-based and culturally and linguistically sustainable implementation of high-quality instructional materials across all tiers of instruction. Though the word equity is in GLEAM's name, we have truly lived out that charge by being specific about what it is we mean by equity and the role GLEAM plays in moving districts towards addressing and redressing disproportionate student experiences and outcomes in the literacy classroom. With these central components, GLEAM has succeeded in more equitable student experiences and outcomes, as I have shared earlier in this presentation. This knowledge has all led to our greatest learning that long-term intensive support works. GLEAM would not be the success it is if it had been a one-year program. Districts need more time and more comprehensive support to make and maintain literacy improvements. Simply purchasing HQIM and providing PD isn't enough for transformative lasting change. GLEAM is successful because it invests in depth over breadth when it comes to time, money, supports, and resources. In closing, we have learned that long-term intensive support through systematic analysis, leadership coaching, progress monitoring, action planning, and implementation works in improving equitable student experiences and outcomes in the literacy classroom. Before we close out, I would like to take a moment to highlight feedback the GLEAM team received from a district administrator. What stands out to me from this quote is the acknowledgement and celebration of a district leader in seeing how a district of schools and silos has become a district of synchronized, supportive schools with a shared vision. The district administrator who shared this comment works in a large urban district with many schools participating in GLEAM. The fact that GLEAM, with its long-term strategic equity-driven vision, supported them in knocking down silos is a testament to the program's success at both the individual and system level. I would like to thank you for your time today, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Mike, you're on mute, bud.
Thank you very much. So I think I saw Chair Craven's hand go right up, or was that just to tell me I was on mute?
No, I was giving you the ear.
Okay, very good. So yeah, we're very happy to the members of the committee at this time.
So
Yes.
Oh yeah, I'll let Marty go first, obviously.
I'll just pose one question about the success data. Obviously, it is very encouraging. Do we know how those changes in, for example, the students at risk for reading failure in grades K through 5, how they compare to statewide trends during that same time period. I know it probably wouldn't be possible to do that on coaching with PD, coaching or PD, where you don't have the same data for the entire state, but have we been able to make those types of outcome comparisons?
I can jump in on that one. At the end of this meeting, I'm going to share some data that we do have on statewide literacy, the extent to which students are meeting literacy benchmarks prior to grade 3 statewide, and the results coming out of the GLEAM districts are much more favorable than statewide.
Great.
Chair Craven?
So I think what the goal of having a committee like this was to identify practices and strategies that can be replicated, not just for pandemic recovery, but forever because of their effectiveness. So where do we go from here? I guess that's the question.
Again, very prescient members of the board. We are going to talk a little bit about literacy launch at the end of this meeting, which is the governor's, as I'm sure you're all aware, new proposed initiative. We want to build the literacy launch programs as much as we can on what we've learned from programs like GLEAM, where like Allison pointed out, one of our biggest learnings from GLEAM is the length of time that literacy transformation requires, 1 year, even 2 years, even 3 years. Districts are telling us that's not enough for the depth of transformation that they're attempting to make. And that after 4 or 5 years, they more start to feel like the roots are really in the ground. Lessons like that, some of which Allison highlighted, we're trying to take all of the sort of like best things that worked about GLEAM and also things that didn't work and lessons that we learned, and make sure that those are the characteristics of the literacy launch investments.
Great. If I could, you identified as one of the 8 core areas the importance of having strong literacy, district-wide literacy leadership teams. And I have to think the district leaders need to be important members of that team. And yet, it's not always the case. We know that every superintendent is necessarily someone with a deep background in early literacy. Do you have any thoughts on how to maximize their commitment and their capacity to be strong leaders in a district-wide literacy leadership team? And along with that, when you think about school principals who may have the same challenges, how are they going to be strong leaders of their professional leadership communities? Does GLEAM help any capacity building in that area?
Yes, I can speak to that. So the GLEAM leadership teams that we have districts develop as they start the grant and continue throughout their literacy improvement journeys must include all of the principals as district leaders. And a lot of the supports that we've provided include building instructional capacity for principals. And we've seen a lot of districts share with us that principals and other literacy leaders have really stepped into being instructional leaders when it comes to literacy improvements. Which I think is a testament to the fact that we ensure that the principals were part of the team from the beginning, as well as central district leadership and classroom teachers to ensure all stakeholders are members of the GLEAM leadership team, are able to participate in leadership decisions and receive the coaching and support that they need to sustain this GLEAM work even after they finish the program and the funding expires.
Okay. So I did notice you said central district leadership, but didn't say superintendent. Is there an expectation that superintendents are supposed to be actively engaged parts of this with the GLEAM grant?
So we did not mandate that superintendents be part of it. Some districts do have their superintendents and assistant superintendents as part of the team. Other districts have chosen to go with a curriculum leader. I think when Catherine was talking about lessons we've learned from GLEAM as we look ahead towards literacy launch, that's one that we definitely want to have a conversation about.
I think it's a very good conversation. I'm mindful of a process the whole state went through for multi-language learners with the RETEL certification. And I would actually call for Massachusetts to establish a similar sort of certification that would be attached to the licensure of school and district principals and superintendents specifically. But maybe food for thought down the road at some point. And with that, Catherine Tarka, if you'd like to introduce Brent Conway to us, and I know here's a assistant superintendent who doesn't need any further instruction. He teaches people how to do this stuff right, and it's going to help us with that right now. So if you'd like to introduce him.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So since the topic of today's meeting is bringing it all together and talking about system-wide improvement for early literacy, we invited Brent Conway, who's the assistant superintendent in Pentucket Regional Schools, and really a thought leader in organizing district-wide improvement, to share both Pentucket's processes and work for literacy improvement and frameworks that he's learned that he advises other districts to employ as well. So I'm going to let you take it away, Brent.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Appreciate having me. So I do have some slides. I'll share them. And actually, just as I listened to that entire conversation and the presentation, there were so many things. I'm like, oh, I can show that. Oh, I can show that too. So appreciate that. So let me get that whole thing going here. Let's see. All right, here we go. All right, we can see that. Everyone can see that? I think
Yes.
so.
Yes,
All right,
all set.
great. So, yeah, systematic literacy changes. So this is my 6th year in Pentucket as the assistant superintendent. Prior to that, I was a principal in Melrose for a number of years, about 12, 13 years. First at an elementary school and then at a middle school. And for those, I know everyone on the call is from Massachusetts, but Pentucket is a regional school district north of Boston, sitting on the Merrimack River. We're centered in West Newbury, but that's our smallest of the 3 towns. So Groveland and Merrimack are with us as well. And for those of you geographically still challenged, Newburyport on one side, Haverhill on the other. We're sandwiched in the middle. So, and a lot of the work that Gleam did and everything that was just spoken about, really impactful work. We were not part of Gleam. We started this work prior to that, around 2018, but so many similarities. And why are there similarities? Because it's pretty obvious based on the data and research, the types of things that you need to do. So a lot of the work that I have done in my past, starting in elementary school, actually Lincoln Elementary School. I see Jessica Lights here on the call too. Jessica was one of my parents when I was an elementary principal. Joe Torgerson, Dr. Torgerson out of the Florida Center, did this work. It was sort of post reading first, but it was through evaluative research on comprehensive school district-wide change. And there were 4 big things that showed up from a systems perspective. School schedules, absolutely critical, and how you manage your school schedules. How your personnel is managed as well. For students who are behind, they need the most direct and explicit instruction, and they need it in smaller groups, and they need time in their schedule to do that. You need to have high quality literacy programs. We can train everything, we can do all those systems, but if you're giving people the wrong tools, they're bound to use it inappropriately and ineffectively. And intervention tools too, and it all sort of needs to align, but they need to be shown how to do it. That ongoing professional development is critical. And then an intervention system, really requires that leadership and management and energy. There's a lot of decisions to be made that should be data driven around doing that. So everything that you were just asking about around leadership roles, as an elementary principal, I started and I did not know the teaching of reading all that well, but most of the things on this list I could do. And then I learned with the teachers about teaching reading better, but I could manage the schedule. I could manage the people. I could set up the data. I could do all of that work. And then I learned the rest along with the teachers as we go. So leadership plays a role here. Fast forward, we did that in Melrose for a number of years, and we've been doing this in Pentucket. In 2018, we started. Obviously, the pandemic threw a real curveball in us. But we are doing tremendously better now than what we were doing before the pandemic. This is what our data looks like in Pentucket. So our percentile rank in 2017 for ELA, MCAS scores had fallen to the 31st percentile in Massachusetts, 245th out of the 357 districts. And then every single year, obviously with no scores for 2020, we have made climbs going up and up and up. And now we are 119th out of 352. We figure we should probably be about 80th percentile. So we know this works. I have similar data from my experiences in Melrose. We did similar work, and I think we're a 3-time commendation school in Massachusetts and became a national blue ribbon school. So we know that these systems work, and it's some of it's different curriculum. It doesn't have to be the same curriculum. There's no one curricular solution. It is a good curriculum, but with all the other systems and leadership stuff in place. So a lot of folks think, and other states have taken an approach of just training teachers, spending lots of money on training teachers. Absolutely critical. Teachers need the knowledge, but they also need the systems and structures and the tools. And if we're just going to train folks and then let them go make decisions and not have those systems and not have sort of the floor of a curriculum in place, people are going to go below the floor. They're going to fall below. And that's why just the training alone is not enough. It really does need the whole systems in place. This is your data in Massachusetts, our data. You saw this. This is the West Ed study. I think Ms. Tarka presented this to you not long ago. So if anyone is wondering why this is so critical to do, I hear 2 statements all the time around systems. People ask the question, what's the percentage of 3rd graders that are proficient, for instance? And I would offer that is absolutely the wrong question to ask. We should be asking around what are the percentage of kindergartners that are on grade level and proficient. That's really the most critical thing, because if this graph tells us anything, by the time kids reach 3rd grade, it gets really hard to move the needle. We have similar data that, we can move this. Well, that gets to 42% down there. We've got it to about 19 or 18% in Pentucket because we're really controlling for the systems. But you still, after 3rd grade, it gets a lot harder to move that needle for kids. We talk about the reading rope. This is all part of the knowledge and really understanding the difference about what's in the middle here. The word recognition, it's important for us to remember that this is not a phonics only approach. This is not a phonics patch. You can't just go get a foundational skill program and plug it in and think that the rest of everything that we might have been doing is effective. It likely was not. There was a lot of approaches used that were either curriculum driven or non-curriculum driven. Teachers just making choices around the language comprehension. There's a real difference in the way that we teach word recognition and the foundational skills versus language comprehension. And a good, solid curriculum program will be able to give you those tools. You still need training in it. So in the system, this is really, once you have those tools in place and some of that knowledge, you need to have that system. And George Batch, who has been here to Massachusetts a number of times, really talks about that there's only so many things we can actually do, but the system should be set up and the leaders in place to be able to pull those levers. This is what we do in Pentucket. We have 6 levers that we can pull for kids. And when kids are behind, we need them to get catch-up growth. And the only way we can do that is through either one or more of these levers. And the system is about knowing which lever to pull for which kid and for the amount of time that they need it. And the leaders have the capacity to do this work. They need support around doing it, but they have the capacity to do it. And you want to build your system so that any one of those levers can get pulled when you need to. And it's important, even as an elementary principal, if you didn't have the knowledge, you have someone else with you who does. But most of these barriers to pulling these levers are administrative ones that we can do administratively. So we can do all the data we want, though. In the end of this, we become leaders the day we decide to help people grow, not numbers. So the numbers might drive our why and our discussions. The work, though, this is about people. This is about adults and kids, but in particular, changing the way adults think about things, the way they prepare for things, and the way that they go to work. So you can go Bowman and Deals, reframing organizations, those structural organizations, the human resources, the political and symbolic. The literacy plan that a district would need is really about all of these four frames and thinking about that. We in Pentucket, we have used the Lippitt-Noster model for managing complex change. If there's ever been complex change, it is about changing the way that you teach literacy in school districts. So our literacy plan accounts for these 6 key components. Do we have a vision? Is there some consensus? How do we do that? What are the skills, not the kids need, what are the skills that the adults need to do this work? What's incentives? What's in it for them? The resources, do we have the right tools, the right curriculum, the right people? And then an action plan, what sequence are we going? And when we plan that out, those are the components that are in our literacy plan. But we also use it going backwards. So as you heard earlier, you see some initial results after a year or 2 of using Gleam. We've been doing similar work for about 6 years now. So we know if we see confusion among staff members, we know that our vision is probably not all that clear. We know if teachers are showing frustration, we probably know that they don't have the resources they need, right? And this is how we use this to help sort of plan and be responsive as this ongoing effort. This is not a 1 or 2 year fix. This is a multi-year longitudinal approach. These are the components that are in a literacy plan. They're in ours. You can match all of these right back to that, to the Lippitt-Noster model. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm not going to read a slide to you. I think they're all, pretty obvious that they're key components. I think people ask which one comes first. I don't know that any one of them comes first. I think every district might need their own plan of attack, but developing the plan about all of them is really where the district context and components might come in. And really, this is around tiered structures and schedules. And this is all research driven. Core literacy instruction is about time and schedule for sure. The concept of flooding grade levels, so having the ability to send teams in to do really targeted instruction, really limiting that pulling of students from core instruction. We're not catching up if all we're doing is replacing. This needs to be in addition to. And tiers are not locations or people. They reflect the intensity, frequency, or format of instruction, and the common planning time. So all of these things were things you saw in the previous presentation. And what I can tell you is this is what we've been doing, and this is a key part of what's effective. So I have some resources here, short overview of a district literacy plan. This is our example that's linked there. There are ESSA requirements that sometimes get ignored when choosing curriculum and programs. There's a blank template outline, and the state has a literacy planning guide from 2010 that might have some components that can be updated, but by and large, it really is still built on a lot of what the evidence is. So I think that's it for me. I am happy to entertain questions and go from there.
Right. And, he's been carrying this message to the farthest corners of the United States of America. And I think it's been very beneficial and useful. If I could just take the chair's privilege to ask the first question. So you have a written articulated strategic plan. So does the state. And, one of the concerns about saying to districts, you got to have a written plan is it becomes just another compliance document and doesn't actually it's not meaningful if that's all it is. Any thoughts or suggestions on how to make sure that's not the fate of putting that effort in with grant funded initiatives and just ending up with something gathering dust in a drawer?
Yeah, I mean, we knew we needed to make some changes. So I think that we took into account that we needed a separate plan. I think other districts may very well have in a strategic plan, a district strategic plan, literacy proficiency being one of 3 or 4 major components. I think the key is to articulate, if literacy proficiency is your goal, to dig in a little bit more around what do you mean by that? How are you measuring that? And then accounting for what, there are evidence-based elements I shared with them, and it's of no coincidence that what I shared will almost match identically to what was shared earlier from the Gleam presentation. So just making sure that those elements, I think, no 2 district literacy plans should look alike. Every district is going to have some differences in their approach. The differences are probably more around the adults, because a lot of it is change management. What are you changing from to get to where you want to go? That's a key part of it. If I was using one particular program and we had a history of training in that program or approach versus another district that really was just kind of choose your own adventure approach without any history, those are two different paths moving towards a systematic approach.
Yeah, if it's fair to say, I think you're invoking that same science of implementation
Yes.
that Allison and Catherine were speaking to earlier. It's not haphazard work. So, right. Any other members have questions?
I'll jump in, Mike.
Marty,
Brent, thanks for your presentation, and that climb up the charts is remarkable. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What would you identify as the key sources of resistance, or if it's not active resistance, the key challenges?
I think every district is going to face different challenges. And again, I think it's where are you starting from? From a leadership perspective, I don't think we really had any leaders in the district who were opposed to the work or thought of it all that differently. I think most of the leaders either knew the work and were prepared to go do it, or didn't really have a strong basis of understanding. So from a leadership perspective, it was just about training and moving folks in that direction. We do have a phrase, Jen Hogan, who's our literacy coordinator, after about halfway doing this work, we have a phrase, we call it the balanced literacy hangover. And it's like these lingering effects of decades of training and experience that people had, beliefs that they've developed that really are not, it's like founded on personal experience and something they've read, but it's not really rooted in evidence. Yeah. Unlearning is a hard thing, especially if people really had a strong belief in efficacy around an approach that they were taking, because they have personal experience with it. So I go to Brene Brown a lot, where she says people don't actually fear change, they fear irrelevance. And I think that's pretty powerful. And that if what you're telling me that I've been doing for 10 or 15 years is wrong, or I need to change it, all of a sudden I am threatened in a way that everything that I've done is now going to be irrelevant. And I think that's far from it. It's not irrelevant. Most teachers have tremendous experience and knowledge to bring. They just have to reframe. Unfortunately, a lot of folks, we were taking the wrong approach. So.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And anyone else? So with that, Brent, thank you very much. You did make a note about how we don't just look at the third grade, we look back to the kindergartners. I've often thought of the work that we are doing here as being a birth to age 8 enterprise, with the point being not looking backwards, but looking forwards. Ultimately, our goal is the elimination of adolescent illiteracy, because if you can make things start right, you're much more likely to have them end right. And so I think I've been working on principles like that for quite a while, and it's greatly appreciated. Catherine or Allison, as we close this part of the agenda, I'll throw it back over to each of you if there's anything else before we move on to the next part of the agenda.
I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which will be back to me, Chair Moriarty, if you're ready to do that.
Absolutely glad to do it. My camera will be going off for a short period of time, but I will be here and fully engaged. Just got something in front of me in the moment. So please do proceed. And again, any members have questions as it goes on, that's absolutely welcome. So please go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just gonna pull my screen back up. All right, can you see the title slide? Okay, great. Building off what Brent shared, Brent's perspective that we shouldn't just be looking at how children are doing at the end of grade 3 on MCAS. We should be asking how children are doing in kindergarten or first grade. At the request of the chair, I'm going to jump back in now to share some highlights from some data on early literacy achievement in the Commonwealth that was just made public this past December from a research study that we conducted here at BESE. So I just want to give some background on the source of this data, because this is all completely new. This type of research hasn't been conducted at the department before or in the state that I'm aware of. So I want to give you some background on the study. Since 2020, BESE has been collecting student level data from districts and schools that are participating in a range of our grants and programs. So essentially for districts that were receiving certain literacy grants or participating in literacy support programs, we asked the district to share their district gathered literacy achievement data with us. So the data was from early literacy screening assessments that were administered in the normal course of district's work in school year 20 and 21. And at the outset, I really just want to thank the districts and the educators that shared that data with us, because they did so voluntarily. And this is research that never would have been possible without their contribution. So a lot of appreciation for them. The way early literacy screening assessments work is that they predict future reading difficulties by assessing students' current skills. So based on what a child can do in, say, the middle of kindergarten, it can be statistically predicted whether that child will have reading difficulties coming up in grade 1. So if a child is on benchmark in kindergarten, that means that they are well set up for all the skills that they need to be successful in grade 1, and they're considered on benchmark. And if assessment determines that the child is likely to experience future reading difficulties based on how they're doing today, they're considered at risk of future reading difficulties. So you'll see the terminology at risk used in this presentation. That means that the child's assessed skills today make it likely that they will struggle in the future. So schools and districts participating in BESE programs shared this data with us. That enabled a first of its kind study of early literacy achievement prior to grade 3 from a representative statewide population. So the data that I'm going to show you includes data from 35,000 unique students in grades K1 and 2, and that represents about 10% of all our grades K through 2 public school students in the state. The population was representative across many important characteristics. It was representative by race, gender, language status, and disability status. So we feel that these data show us the current state for our early learners and how they're doing with their reading proficiency, both where we're being successful and the work we have left to do. We asked, I think, a ton of interesting questions in this study. And if you want to know more, I would encourage you to download the full report, which is available in public on BESE's website. But I'm just going to highlight 4 key findings that I think would be really interesting for the committee. So first off, we simply examined how many of our students in grades K1 and 2 are at risk for reading difficulties. So as I mentioned before, a student is designated at risk if they don't meet reading benchmarks at the time that they're assessed. And children are assessed sometimes 2, typically 3 times per year with their early literacy screener. The beginning of the year is referred to as BOY. The middle of the year is referred to as MOY, and the end of the year is referred to as ZOY. So as you can see, this table tells us how many students across our entire population were at risk or at significant risk. Significant risk refers to a score that is really quite far below benchmarks, and the student requires urgent support and attention to get back on track. So in the school years that we studied, we had 64% of all students in the sample scoring at risk at some point. What I find striking is that 18% of students were at risk at all 3 time periods that they were assessed. And that's almost 1 in 5 students. And 36% of students were never at risk during the time period studied. So this is just giving us some color to how our students are doing in grades K to 2 that we've really never had access to before. I also wanted to be sure to highlight what we found about comparisons between student groups. And we found that students from historically marginalized groups were more likely than their peers not in those groups to ever score below benchmark. So this is really reflecting the inequities in the system that we see in other types of data collection. You can see this table shows the relative risk of ever scoring below benchmark. So for example, students who are economically disadvantaged were 1.4 times more likely to be below benchmark than their peers that were not in that group. And for another example, you can see that Black students were 1.2 times more likely to ever be below benchmark as compared to white students. So like I mentioned, these findings demonstrate that we face the same inequities with early literacy proficiency and achievement, even going all the way down to the beginning of kindergarten that we see in so many other areas. We see them in early literacy as well. Some evidence that our system is not supporting students from these historically marginalized groups to achieve at the same levels as their peers. This is a graph that Brent briefly showed you, and I just wanted to expound upon it to make sure that we can discuss what it shows. So this graph shows the percentage of students that were at risk, which again means scoring below benchmark, at 3 different time periods in the year: beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. The black line is kindergarten, the blue line, the bright blue line is first grade, the dotted line is second grade, and the green slash is third grade. So as you can see, students in every grade level improve their risk status during the school year. That's why all 4 lines are diving. That means students in all the grade levels are doing better at the end of the year than they are at the beginning of the year. For instance, 62% of our kindergarten students started off the year at risk, but at the end of the year, only 43% were at risk. And that's great, right? That shows us that students are learning and making progress and exiting risk status during the year while they're receiving instruction. But there's 2 things to note. The proportion of students at the end of the year still at risk is still quite high. It's in the 40s. So that means that even after the year of instruction and improving on their status, we still have between 43 and 46% of students in each grade level exiting the year at risk. And the other thing to note is the difference between grade levels. A really sizable group of kindergartners and first graders reach benchmark by the end of the year, but look at the third graders. Very few of them who began the year at risk were able to improve their status and reach benchmark by the end of the year. Only 4% of the total sample actually made that move. So with each year that goes by, we see that reaching those benchmarks becomes more and more difficult for a student that has been allowed to fall behind. So we think this illustrates the importance of meeting students' needs really early, like as early as possible, because more students are demonstrating the ability to move in kindergarten and in first grade. And this is my final data point that I'd like to share with you, and this is related to the differences in grade levels as well. The study looked at whether students who were at risk tended to stay at risk over longer multi-year periods of time. So this graph shows the percentage of students who were at risk at the end of the year of those who were at risk way at the beginning of the year prior. So we're talking about over 2 years of instruction, the percentage of students that stayed at risk that entire time. So of the students who were at risk at the beginning of kindergarten, 38% were still at risk 2 years later at the end of first grade. But again, the trend is towards less growth as students get older, because if you look at students who are at risk at the beginning of second grade, all the way later at the end of third grade, 69% of them were still at risk. So really, the large majority of students who begin second grade at risk stay in that status and are not able to move out of that status by the time they reach the end of third grade. I do want to note that due to the variations in who provided data to BESE, this was only 2% of the students for whom we had data, complete data over 2 years, and that's a small slice of the total population. So we are repeating and retesting these findings as we continue to collect data and have a more robust data set. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to invite questions or discussion. And I just want to note, Chair Moriarty, that I have just one final slide on literacy launch and what we anticipate for literacy launch, which I can share now, or I can share after discussion of the data if you prefer.
Why don't we hold the literacy launch and look at that in a separate way? But in the meantime, if we can take the screen down just so I can see my colleagues, let me invite any questions regarding the data we just saw, any other data that you might be mindful of or have questions about, and be happy to take that.
Can I ask
Yeah,
one
Marty.
question, Catherine? Well, you took your slides down. So I'm very interested in this striking line graph showing more progress in grades K through 2 than in grade 3.
Please feel free to put it back up.
The other thing that's different about the third.
Go ahead.
Marty, yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. As soon as it's back up, let's proceed.
So the other thing that's different about the third grade data is that if you look at, say, kindergarten, at the end of kindergarten, 43% of kids are at risk. But by the fall of first grade, that has jumped back up to be considerably higher. But the third grade sort of, the beginning of the year data looks more encouraging relative to what you might expect based on the patterns in the other grades. Do you have an explanation for that?
One likely reason for that is that the benchmark is continually escalating, or you could think of it as a moving target. So if a child is at benchmark, say in the middle of kindergarten, they have to learn quite a lot to still be at benchmark at the end of kindergarten as the benchmark moves up and the assessments get more difficult. So the beginning of first grade assessment is quite a bit harder than the end of kindergarten assessment. So if a child was just barely meeting at the end of kindergarten, for instance, and didn't continue to learn over the summer, or as we often know about summer slide, there may even be a decline in skills if they're not utilized over the summer. That combined with the escalating difficulty of the assessment, I think could be what's behind that.
But then there's less of that going into third grade from second grade. That's sort of the striking pattern.
Yeah, so most of these early literacy screening assessments introduce an oral reading fluency assessment in somewhere between the middle of first and the middle of second grade, which is testing whether or not the student can fluently read an actual paragraph or story. So if a student is secure in that key ability, they're not likely to lose it over the summer, for instance. They're not going to forget how to read fluently due to summer slide. So if a student is at benchmark by the end of second grade, they're quite able to apply those same skills and do well at the beginning of third grade. At least that's my hypothesis. Whereas a student who's passing the benchmark at the end of kindergarten by being able to name letter sounds, if they don't do anything with those letter sounds over the summer, they may slide in that skill.
Got it. That's helpful. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. I also, looking at this, I'm also kind of looking off screen at the statewide data, and as you know, from 2019 pre-pandemic to 2022, we saw an 8% reduction in the third grade proficiency rate, which is the earliest grade that is measured. So it had remained flat, but that reduction would theoretically mean that we're in a more difficult situation for trying to gain recovery for these students in the 46 to 42% in the earlier grades. But these are students post-pandemic. All of this data was gathered in that time frame, right?
This is really mid-pandemic data because this is from school year 20 and 21. We're currently working with data from school year 22, and we'll be able to release those findings pretty soon. So if we've been successful in accomplishing some pandemic recovery, we should see a real bounce in the data that we gathered during 22, but we don't have that analysis yet.
Yeah, that'd be a very interesting study because that is like midpoint potentially with the number of students who are still actually getting their instruction remotely, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a good proportion of this data from school year 20 is going to be from students who were both taught and assessed remotely.
Yeah, so that's that is, there's so many factors that can contribute to what we see here, but that certainly has to be thought of as one. The other point, because I think that is a very important point, maybe speaks strongly to the importance of parent and family engagement, to deep knowledge of every student's individualized needs, and to the importance of multi-tiered systems of support in terms of trying to reach that 46 to 42% in the early grades and get results. We do see a very high number of kids, actually almost the same percentage that we were experiencing pre-pandemic, stuck at these early grades. And what I also noticed, if you look at the grade 3 to 8 English language art outcomes, those students over time don't recover. Actually, their outcomes for proficiency as well as for not meeting expectations are just a little bit worse by the time when they're considered as an entire group together. So that is that's kind of indicative as to how high a challenge you have with kids moving forward. So which is a very long way of just going about a question of saying, do you think this indicates the importance of multi-tier systems of support? And is that something we should be highlighting?
Well, one thing we know about children whose screening result comes out as at risk or especially at significant risk is that they require additional support over and beyond core instruction to reach benchmark. It's very unlikely to reach benchmark through core instruction alone. So we know now from this data that depending on the grade level, we're talking about between 46 to 62% of our students who at the beginning of any given school year require additional support to get on track. And we know from programs like Gleam that when they receive appropriate targeted support, they do get on track in large numbers. Just about our ability to provide that.
Which I think highlights a perfect segue to maybe going into a few thoughts about the literacy launch. And but before you do, again, I just need you to take the slide down so I can see if any of my colleagues are looking for further questions before I take advantage of that segue. And seeing none, please jump right ahead.
All right, this is the last time I'm going to do this. Share my screen one more time to give you a little overview of what's next. So we are beginning to plan for what the literacy launch programs and supports for districts would entail. As you all are well aware, Governor Healy announced this new literacy launch initiative in her FY25 budget proposal. So all I want to share today are the components of the initiative as it's been proposed. And then I'm happy to invite your questions about how the planning process is going to look or any input that you might have, because at the very early stages of planning this, we'd certainly be interested to hear your input. So the initiative as it's been proposed includes these 5 components. First, statewide professional development. So as it's been articulated, literacy launch should make professional development in evidence-based and culturally and linguistically sustaining early literacy practices available to all educators statewide that have a hand in early literacy instruction. So that would be classroom teachers, language support teachers, special education teachers, administrators, reading coaches, interventionists, all the many staff and professionals that support early literacy will have access to this professional development. Secondly, Literacy Launch will really expand the types of support networks that are available for schools, districts, and educator prep programs to join. So in the Center for Instructional Support, as well as other units of BESE, traditionally offered these type of support networks every year for schools and districts. So for instance, we have a network called the Massachusetts Literacy Planning Institute that helps small districts develop a district literacy plan. We have the Massachusetts Dyslexia Institute, which invites a team of district representatives to learn all about dyslexia and develop a district dyslexia plan. So we offer these types of supports and networks every year. They're come one, come all. You know, any district that would like to participate can come and take advantage of them. Literacy Launch will allow us to provide more of that programming in response to what districts and educators are asking for, and to have a higher capacity, because we often can't serve all the districts that want to participate. So we'll be able to address more in-demand topics and serve more educators. We've also started to offer more supports for our educator preparation faculty and staff as they work to enhance their prep programs that have to do with early literacy. And those offerings have been popular and well received, so we want to be able to expand those as well. Third point is that Literacy Launch will allow us to offer more intensive support grants. So as we've been talking about GLEAM and how appreciated GLEAM has been by the participating districts and how effective it's been, we had many more districts apply for GLEAM than we were actually able to serve. And now with our many lessons learned in hand from having run GLEAM since 2020, we want to offer similar intensive support grants with the support of Literacy Launch funding to be able to serve more districts. It will look like GLEAM, but better. That's our goal. Fourth bullet point is we want to support districts that are interested in using Appleseeds. So as this committee has heard about before, Appleseeds is DESE's own free and open source curriculum for early literacy foundational skills. It's a really great resource for a district that does not have a high quality curriculum in place for early literacy foundational skills, and we make it available, the materials themselves, as well as professional development and support for free. It continues to kind of snowball and gain more popularity from districts. We had more districts than we were able to serve interested in funding for Appleseeds this year. So we're excited to be able to expand that support so that any district who needs Appleseeds is able to access it. And finally, we will be accelerating the formal review of educator prep programs that license teachers in early childhood, elementary, or moderate disabilities, to ensure that those programs are aligned with our new, more extensive criteria for early literacy in those licensure areas. Typically, it would have taken 7 years to review all programs with these new criteria, and with the support of Literacy Launch, we'll be able to do it in about half that time.
If I could do a little math with you on this, a lot of what you introduced us to, especially around the implementation of GLEAM, was based, if I remember correctly, on a 5-year, $20 million federal grant,
That's right.
which averages to $5 million a year. And we're now looking at a 1-year allocation of 30 million, which is a really significant scaling up. Although out of the Fair Share Amendment, where we're really only asking for less than 2% of all of the forecasted revenues coming up this year. So if Literacy Launch does become law and is implemented in the way you suggest, that's actually a pretty significant upscale. And in addition to that, if the Literacy Launch is sustained as intended, that would probably be able to reach every child in the Commonwealth in a much more effective, expedited pace. Am I doing my math well?
It is certainly going to be an expansion of the current funding levels. And we hope that we can reach every educator, every school with a combination of these programs. So with the statewide professional development being something that we envision any educator being able to access, the support networks and institutes being open to as many schools or teams as wish to sign up. The intensive support grants, we would not likely be able to support every school in the Commonwealth because of the intense nature. That's going to be a smaller slice, but there certainly will be support that should be able to reach it.
Great. And again, any of my other colleagues with additional questions or comments?
Okay, just to ask this question. So I think it's important that the money be available to districts for this sort of thing, but I also wonder about what's the department's role? And I really honestly ask this, it sounds like a crazy question, but what's the department's role in allowing PD to continue that isn't based on the science of reading? Meaning, like, do we have a role as a department in perpetuating bad practices by allowing districts that don't opt into this hortatory idea of embracing this pedagogical model? Any options on the non-hortatory part? Is there a way to shut down access to basically harmful professional development that perpetuates what you were saying too, Catherine, about like, this is the way it's always been, we're comfortable, and it's the adult fear of change as opposed to what's great for kids?
Our role is primarily in supporting best practices. And so we're able to approve professional development providers that meet our criteria. That makes it easier for school districts to partner with them. Whenever we offer funding, we ensure that the funding is being used on approved purchases, approved partners, approved curricular materials. But that doesn't extend to them.
Right, because there's a lot of districts that don't, they're minimum aid districts. And so it goes back to this concept of the department's role in accountability or in teacher certification or other things like that. Like, aren't there levers there somehow that can be used in a way that we've never thought about it before? And I'd be interested in hearing Secretary Tutwiler and Russell, not right now, maybe even, it might be too hot, but I just don't know why, if we know something is harmful for kids, we would continue allowing it to be perpetuated in that way.
Certainly, Pat Tutwiler speaking here, something for further discussion, and sort of thinking about what is in BESE's purview as an authority. I mean, I don't think that they can sort of prohibit professional development in one direction or another right now, but as Catherine was mentioning, there are some standards that they, that are in their purview that they can sort of lift up to say, here are supported or approved providers of professional development that sort of align with, what research says is best practice and what BESE is leaning into. But certainly more conversation could be had on that. And I do think that as one of the 5 or 6 things that Literacy Launch supports, having to do with accelerating the review process for teacher prep programs to ensure that their programs are aligned with evidence-based literacy practices is a lever that's being pulled, and certainly will be, I think, provide a sustained impact as teachers are coming into the profession. But more conversation certainly could be had.
Sure. And I asked this question in the for instance, if there was a science curriculum out there that was teaching phrenology, right? Like say, take something that's totally discredited, something from like the 1500s that, you know, it's really a discredited thing, but we just don't have any power or other than urging good behavior or urging conformity. You know, like what's the role of the state board, I guess?
I think of three things. First, they're the things that the board has taken specific action on to create change. So I think about the new early literacy screening assessment criteria that we put in place. So there are examples of where the board working within, regulation has to match up to a statute. So where does the board have the regulatory authority to create a new requirement? And we did that with the screening assessment. But all of these are worth exploring further. So like you said, this could be, fodder for a future conversation. So there's, an example like this early screening assessment is an example of how the board could continue to think about their role in promoting effective instructional strategies. The second is where there are other required steps that districts have to take, like to apply for Title I funds, right? There are steps that have to be followed. And so that's worth following up on further. And then the third is around what's optional. And what Catherine and her team have done is they've made it so that if you are going to opt into any type of DESE funding, you have to make sure that you are committing to following evidence-based practices.
Yeah.
And so all three of those areas are worth looking at further and just seeing what we can do to continue to drive towards effective strategies as opposed to ineffective strategies. And I think certainly fodder for a further conversation.
I can join in on a bit of that conversation because it's something we've actually been studying for the past 14 months in the context of all these meetings that we've had. The first thing I would suggest is we do have not only the need, but the constitutional mandate to follow up on a lot of these principles of best practices that get results for kids throughout the Commonwealth. I mean, that just reminder that the McDuffie case doesn't say that the mandate that we cherish in advanced education is aspirational. It's actually our call to action. When we had last passed the health frameworks, I'd suggested that, the current ELA frameworks are now 7 years old. And to the extent that our frameworks clearly and unambiguously articulate best practices in evidence-based literacy, I don't think we're far afield from that right now. Could we be tighter? Is that worth a review in the not too distant future? And should that core document that the board oversees and has a role in, should that not be something that's a subject of continuous and cyclical improvement? That would be another sort of big picture area I'd think about. But finally, that there are areas that have been revealed through these conversations, through other information over the course of the last year or so, where we've seen places where the department doesn't have all the time the amount of regulatory authority it needs to address what we find are inappropriate or harmful practices in districts. And the Joint Education Committee of the legislature did recently report out a bill that could broaden that regulatory authority. So, I think that's a recognition that there is a need out there. But again, as with proposed budgetary language of the literacy launch, I think there's some balls that are in the legislature's court right now that would have to be enacted favorably in order for us to move with the strongest hand possible going forward. And I'm specifically referencing H 4423 for those of you who want to look up. So I just add those sort of thoughts about how broadly the department's able to move forward. But I don't think moving forward and being able to move forward is a nice to have. I think it's a constitutional mandate and a gotta have. And with that, is there?
Oh, by the way,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just for that purpose, then, if I were listening to this and thinking that the board had a constitutional mandate to provide this high quality instructional materials to everybody, it's not that far of a leap from what happened with Hancock, right?
That's right. If we're going to be chronically looking at subgroups that have vast gaps that never seem to get better, you know, people will act. People will move to try to get better outcomes for their children. As so well articulated in the Right to Read movie we watched in our board retreat, this is a civil right issue. So with that, if there's any further questions or topics, I'll then go into what next steps are for us as a committee and reporting all this out. So is there anyone who has anything else before I move on? Okay. So with that, 14 months in, I believe we've had 8 or 9 meetings. And I guess, Marty, this is also kind of a conversation with us because this is not my mandating what happens next, but rather broadly suggesting what I think makes sense and trying to convey that to Commissioner Johnson and the department while they're here. So all of these are public meetings reduced to minutes. I think we review the minutes so that we can collate the information that has been shared to date. And with that, we can have a draft that from the department's perspective, as they work with bringing that document together, can give us sets of recommendations. I would suggest framing it around those broad topics of education prep, assessment, and intervention, and curriculum selection, if I'm remembering them correctly. But they're in a very nice chart if we go back to Dr. Burke's presentation. But to sort of frame them in those broad buckets and look at the more in-depth information that we've received so far, and from there, state where we're at and what we recommend in order to go forward that can be presented to the entire board. But I think it's also important to note we're in a dynamic world in this field of early literacy, and a lot of things have happened over the course of the last 14 months since we've had some of the meetings. For instance, the new guidelines that were just released to accelerate and intensify the review of education prep programs. It's not part of our record because that was just released in the last month. A lot of districts, including the largest districts in Massachusetts, have adopted new high quality instructional materials. And that has been a positive trajectory and a moving target. I think this report would need to recognize that these events have occurred. As we just saw with the literacy launch, that is not a past budgetary initiative. It is a proposal. So, it's great fodder for recommendations, but it's also something to keep an eye on as this work moves forward, because that's something that's going to emerge, and things will happen between now and the time we see a report, potentially. And then, one of the things I think was important is the emerging calls for English language and emerging bilingual focus on this work, an area of in which people who are working on science of reading are often criticized for not paying a sufficient amount of attention to. We certainly paid attention to it in the course of this. I know that organizations like the Reading League and the National Committee of Effective Literacy have done some very well-regarded work in support of this, again, since we had that meeting. Reports have been issued. So I think having a sense of what's going on out in the field since we've had our meetings, making sure it's attributed to some quality footnoting, I think might be important if it wasn't addressed in our meeting. But then we can pretty much have a rather in-depth, state-of-the-art report and set of recommendations that we can then move forward to the rest of the board, to the department, and to the public at large. It was suggested to me that that could be turned around possibly as nearby as May, but I would not hold anybody to that suggestion. I really am more interested that it be done thoroughly and clearly and well rather than quickly. So what are your thoughts, Marty? Is that kind of the right direction to be moving
Yeah,
in?
that sounds exactly right. What I was going to suggest when you started talking was actually to go back to the original framing that Dr. Burke provided in our first meeting. And, you know, as I understood, really the structure of what we've been engaged in over the past almost a year is that we were really going item by item through her framework and comparing the state of play in Massachusetts to what has emerged as a set of best practices and where there were opportunities to learn from what's been done elsewhere. And so I think that structure makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought as much about what you just mentioned in terms of developments that have occurred since the record was generated, but we obviously need to find a way to incorporate those. And I think the only other thing is whether we want to, in some areas, highlight what, you know, specific steps the board could take to go back to Chair Craven's last comment, like where we have the authority to act, where legislation would be needed, and just basically pay attention to the board's prerogative or lack thereof as we discuss the issues that, you know, in the way that you just laid out.
Great. And, you know, I do think if you go back to some of the different speakers that we've had, that has sometimes been addressed more often by people from the department than from without, but in some cases has not necessarily been. And I think in each topic area, you know, as staff looks at it and prepares this for us, they can highlight that as a sort of standing question for each topical area. So that would be a plan, and I would say that when a draft is available, we might want to have a not a informational meeting as we've been doing, but another working meeting for us to see if we have an agreement that we've got a report or recommendations that are ready to be presented to the committee, and then we can, or to the board, and then we can publish that for the board at the very next meeting. So, and at that point, I think our charge is complete. If you agree with that, Chair Craven.
Yes, and I think the follow-up too will be really important. There's been so much good that's come out of this, and so I think making sure it just doesn't sit on a shelf, or like I think between Commissioner Johnston, Secretary Tutwiler, we can work on making sure we hit this note in every single meeting on the agenda in some way going forward. It's too important and too constant to lose momentum on, right?
I agree. And so with that, unless there's any other questions or comments from anyone present, I will go ahead and ask with your consent, Member West, that we adjourn the meeting.
I do give my consent, but not before thanking you for your leadership of the subcommittee. You've done all of the work. I've been along for the ride. So thank you for the crash course that you've given me and the collective learning that it represents for the board and ultimately the Commonwealth. So thanks.
I very much appreciate that. That's very, very kind. And let's put the proof in the final product. So we'll be hard at work.
All right. Take care.
All right. We are
Thank you.
adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.